Good evening. Tonight, we'll be discussing the hypothesis of academician Anatoly Fomenko, according to which traditional views on history and chronology are incorrect. Our guest in the studio is Andrei Podoynitsyn, a member of the New Chronology Research Group and a follower of Anatoly Fomenko. You can join the conversation with Andrei Maksimov by calling the phone numbers shown on your screen.
Good evening. First, I should explain why the academician himself isn't here. The fact is, academician Fomenko is not a public figure. He's a scientist, a very prominent mathematician in addition to being involved in historical research. He doesn't appear on live broadcasts. Fortunately, he has followers. Thank you, Andrei Vladimirovich, for being here. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yevgenia mentioned that our traditional views are changing. I'd like to ask you a simple question. Is it true that, according to academician Fomenko's theory, Christ was born 1,000 years later than commonly believed, which would mean that our entire calendar system is incorrect since it is based on Christ's birth? That the Mongol Tatar invasion never happened at all? That the ancient world never existed? That the Battle of Kulikovo took place not where we think, but in the center of Moscow? Is it true that academician Fomenko claims all this?
That's absolutely right. The seemingly unbelievable facts you just mentioned are indeed conclusions drawn from academician Fomenko's theory.
I think any curious viewer must already be quite intrigued. So, before we begin digging into the core of this theory, let's take a look at a brief profile on Anatoly Fomenko's work. Here it is.
Anatoly Fomenko is a renowned scientist, mathematician, academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and a professor at Moscow State University. He is also a rather unconventional artist. In 1979, academician Fomenko put forward the hypothesis that the currently accepted chronology and history of the ancient and medieval world is incorrect, and proposed his own version. Fomenko's theory has been published in a number of books, co-authored with fellow scholar Gleb Nosovsky. The hypothesis has sparked widespread interest and debate. Books by Fomenko and Nosovsky are selling well. In 1995, the New Chronology Research Group was formed. Economist Andrei Podoynitsyn is a member of this group.
We were worried whether people would actually call in. The video segment hasn't even ended yet, and we already have a call. Let's start with it. Go ahead, Yevgenia.
Let's begin. On the line with us now is a director and economist named Lev. Please go ahead.
Good evening. I'm very interested in how Fomenko's theory aligns with the theory of Lev Gumilev. And more specifically, does it affect the ages of ethnic groups? If so, what would be the age of the Russian ethnos?
Now that's the kind of audience we have.
Brilliant question. The theory, or as we call it, the hypothesis, of academician Fomenko correlates very well with the views of Lev Gumilev and, in some respects, directly relies on them. In particular, Fomenko's hypothesis incorporates the entire critical portion of Gumilev's work, especially his observations that the so-called Mongol Tatar invasion is in no way supported by Russian chronicles or other written sources.
I have to say, starting the show by declaring there was no Mongol Tatar invasion is pretty bold. I consider myself open-minded, but this is truly shocking. First, I want to understand something. Historians don't just make this stuff up. There are chronicles, they read them. So how can Fomenko claim that this wasn't described in the chronicles?
Andrei, the thing is, due to historical tradition, or perhaps our educational upbringing, we tend to believe that history has come down to us from the depths of time, at least since ancient Rome, as a coherent and continuous set of chronicles that were meticulously recorded through the centuries. But in reality, that's just not the case. The version of history and chronology that we know and consider traditionally correct today was only created at the beginning of the 17th century by two scholars, Joseph Scaliger and Dionysius Petavius, as a result of a massive effort to compile and organize material that before them had never truly been systematized. But their version was never universally accepted by the scholarly world.
Here's what I want to understand. Say there's a chronicle. Someone reads it, and then what?
The thing is, many ancient chronicles are actually very difficult to work with. For example, they are often written almost entirely in consonants, or even only in consonants.
Why?
That was the tradition in ancient times. Likely due to the need to conserve writing materials, paper, and time, they were written that way. Often the words were written together, with no spaces and no punctuation marks.
Sorry, just to clarify, chronicles aren't read, they're deciphered?
Exactly.
So, one person could decipher it one way, and someone else another way?
Exactly. That's why linguists use the term to interpret a chronicle, not to read, but to interpret. But chronicles also have several other features that need to be mentioned. For example, standard spellings only became established within individual languages after the invention of printing. Before that, spelling within a single language could vary significantly. Additionally, we now know that different scripts and even different alphabets were used within the same language. I'd like to show a copy of the inscription on the Zvenigorod Great Bell. Virtually every line is written in a different version of the Russian alphabet.
It's a bit hard to see. Looks like there are maybe 10 lines here. Let's take another look. So, this is all in Russian, but each line is different?
That's right. There's a transcription at the bottom. It's a standard biblical text in Church Slavonic. Each line uses a different script. And sometimes the opposite occurred. The same letters, like Cyrillic, were used to write entirely different languages. Let me read a short excerpt. This is a prayer by Afanasy Nikitin, which he uses to conclude his famous book A Journey Beyond Three Seas. Just a brief fragment.
I really want to emphasize this. I know what you're about to hear, and it just blew my mind. This is a prayer by the famous Russian traveler Afanasy Nikitin, who wrote A Journey Beyond Three Seas.
Here's the excerpt. By God's mercy I came beyond three seas.
Digir hudo donno ollo pervo digir danno amin. Milna Rahman Ragim ollo akbir akshi hudo ililo akshodo isa racholo alik solom.
Forgive me, those who know the Turkic language, I'm probably saying something terribly wrong, but I'm doing my best. And here's the translation of the unclear part. There is no God but Allah, the merciful and compassionate. Jesus is the Spirit from Allah.
How do you explain that? Jesus is the Spirit from Allah.
This also doesn't quite fit into our standard understanding of the development of specific religions and denominations. But I wouldn't want to dwell on that right now. Instead, I'd like to mention a few more key features of ancient chronicles, very important ones. For example, there was no unified chronological scale. Even a point of reference like, from the creation of the world, had dozens of variations depending on the author. In fact, the extremes could differ by thousands of years. Also, in ancient times, abstract personal names, like Ivan, Peter, John, Martha, didn't exist. Instead, people were typically referred to by nicknames or titles such as Great King, the Saint, or the Lame.
So, based on that, it's possible to interpret such a nickname as referring to one historical person, or to another, or a third.
Exactly. And when translated, these nicknames would simply be rendered differently in each language.
So far, it's clear that Fomenko interpreted the chronicles differently from how others had done before, but apparently, there's more to it. Let's take a listener question and then continue.
We now have a question from a candidate of technical sciences. Vladimir, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Andrei. Very glad to see you on TV. I'd like to ask a question I never had the chance to ask Fomenko. In his book, The New Chronology, aside from aligning historical timelines, he mentioned that he input all of old chronology, with possible inaccuracies, into a program, ran a strict mathematical analysis, and produced new historical tables. As a specialist in programming, I'd really like to know, what kind of program is capable of processing all of old chronology? Thank you for the answer.
Thank you. Vladimir, I'd just like to make a small correction. The fact is, what was fed into the program wasn't just chronology, it was practically the entire historical fabric from the ancient Sumerians up to the 16th century. All historical events, their sequences, combinations of specific episodes, the frequency of mentions of rulers, dynasties, and so on. Everything that could be formalized and converted into numbers was included in the dataset. And once processed, the results were absolutely astounding. I was going to mention this later, but maybe it's fitting to say now. What emerged were findings of this nature. The entire historical canvas appeared to consist of pairs and groups of epochs which, when represented graphically or numerically, and overlaid on top of one another, turned out to be either extremely similar or outright identical.
I don't get it. Well, I kind of do, but we need to dig deeper. Can you be specific? What do you mean by all historical epochs?
It means that they discovered the following patterns. For example, some dynasty ruled for 200 years. The first king ruled 2 years, the next one 3 years, the third 5 years, another 15 years. And it turns out there's another era with the exact same sequence. First ruled 2 years, second 3, third 5, another 17.
And the conclusion?
It means these epochs are fundamentally interrelated. That one is essentially a phantom reflection of the other.
So, in reality, maybe one of them never even existed?
Exactly. This is about the replication of the same real events across many so-called epochs. And during mathematical and statistical analysis, it turned out not only that these epochs were identical in numeric structure, but that they were separated by precise intervals. Academician Fomenko and his close associate Gleb Nosovsky identified 3 major chronological shifts by 330 years, 1050 years, and 1780 years.
From what reference point are those counted?
From one another. These are relative figures. So, if you find a pair of similar epochs, you can be confident that they are separated by either 330, 1050, or 1780 years.
Which means, we're saying that a certain historical period supposedly existed, but in fact it's a phantom. So, which one is the phantom?
Logically, the phantom epoch is, of course, the one that has been pushed further into the past. That's the reasonable conclusion, and yes, it can be proven.
I want something concrete. For example, this didn't happen. This epoch is a phantom.
If we speak directly about what didn't happen, then we can say, and this is a conclusion that sounds shocking, even scandalous, the entire ancient world never existed. Unfortunately, this is the conclusion drawn from objective mathematical, astronomical, and statistical research.
But didn't the ancient world leave behind any material evidence of its existence?
What kind of evidence would you like to see?
Architectural monuments.
There are plenty of architectural monuments that are traditionally attributed to the ancient world. Take the Colosseum, for example, or countless other sites.
That's exactly what I was hinting at.
Right, but the point is that these monuments are incorrectly dated. After all, none of these monuments bear original dates, which is paradoxical. There are no original dates. Take a look at any European cathedral, for example, or the pyramids, the Osirian temple in Egypt, anything you like. You won't find original dates carved into them along with the hieroglyphs or inscriptions.
Why is that?
Good question. Apparently, in those times, in antiquity, there simply was no unified chronological scale. Actually, this is a fact, as we've already discussed. Inscriptions usually date a monument by referencing the reign, death, or birth of some great figure. In other words, this just shows that a unified chronological framework didn't exist yet, and we see no trace of it either.
So far, we've stated that the ancient world never existed and that the Tatar-Mongol yoke never happened. Let's take a look. Actually, we haven't yet talked about the Tatar-Mongol yoke. We're about to. We have a call coming in. Yevgenia, go ahead.
I'm very glad that knowledgeable people are calling into the show today with arguments. We've just received a call from a journalist who also studies history. His name is Igor. Please, go ahead.
I have a question. In one of his works, Fomenko and his cohorts discuss the history of Russian coinage. They rely on the most basic, purely speculative principle. that minting technology always improves, and therefore, later coins should be more advanced than earlier ones. But I want to say, you just need to talk to people who collect coins, or read some popular literature. Then you'll see, if you compare coins of the Russian Empire from 1912 to what's being minted today under the name coin, we're basically back in the 16th century compared to what was produced before 1913. How do you and your boss explain that? That's the first question. And second, it's probably an open secret, though maybe you'll deny it or confirm it, but some of Fomenko and Nosovsky's books were allegedly funded by the Dianetics Center associated with the infamous Ron Hubbard. Is that true or not? Thank you.
Let me start with the second part, about Fomenko's work being funded by Scientologists. Naturally, how can I put it mildly, that's not true. And I really don't even want to discuss it. It's like that recent piece claiming that Yevgeny Primakov took a bribe from Saddam Hussein in the early 1990s and so on. It's simply not a topic worth discussing. As for numismatics, the simplification of coinage in the Soviet Union, or in the world in general during the 20th century, doesn't indicate a decline of minting as such. Rather, I think, again purely speculatively, we can say that coins are slowly being pushed out of circulation and no longer play the same role they did in the Middle Ages. Back then, as we all can guess, there were no plastic cards, checks, or even paper money. Coins were the primary, and likely the only, means of payment. That's why so much attention was paid to their appearance and quality. Nowadays, for purely practical reasons, standardization, simplification, and so on, coinage just isn't at its peak.
Now, let's continue. I'm trying to lay out a line of thought I had planned before the broadcast, but the calls keep knocking it off track. Then again, what you're saying is just too astonishing. I still want to understand, what does Fomenko base all this on? He reads the manuscripts differently. That's one thing. What else?
The different interpretation of manuscripts is actually a result of the methods Fomenko uses. So, what's new about his approach? After all, there have been plenty of researchers in history, starting from Isaac Newton, Mikhail Lomonosov, and many Russian historians and scholars, Chertkov, Aksakov, Kachanovsky, Clausen. The list could go on, Gumilev, and of course the brilliant encyclopedist Nikolai Morozov, all of whom held unorthodox views on history.
So, what's new in Fomenko's approach?
The novelty of Fomenko's approach lies in the fact that, unlike previous researchers, he examined the entirety of the historical fabric rather than isolated episodes. It turned out that reconstructing isolated episodes is impossible, since these episodes are organically intertwined and embedded in the full tapestry of world history. That's why the entire historical narrative was subjected to analysis. The whole saga of historical research began when academician Fomenko was working on problems in his primary field, mathematics. He was tackling a problem in celestial mechanics and came across some astounding data which led to one of two conclusions. I won't go into the details of the problem now. Either the standard gravitational theory was wrong, or the traditional datings of lunar eclipses were incorrect. Fortunately, academician Fomenko was familiar with the work of Nikolai Morozov, who had already done a titanic job redating ancient astronomical records. Fomenko substituted Morozov's revised dates into the celestial mechanics calculations, and everything fell into place. It turned out that the standard gravitational theory was absolutely correct.
So, simply put, the standard gravitational theory holds, but it says an eclipse occurred in such and such year, whereas in reality,
it was in a completely different century, much later.
So, what doesn't match up? The chronicles description?
The chronicles description can't be inaccurate. What doesn't match is the date assigned to the chronicle or to the event described within it.
Doesn't match with what?
With reality. With when the chronicle was actually written and when the events actually took place.
Understood. Let's take another call. Go ahead, Yevgenia.
Let's hear from German Nikolaevich. He's a retired military officer. Please.
Hello. I have a question. There are mummies that have been recovered from pyramids. Isn't it possible to determine their age using carbon dating and so on?
Thank you very much for the question.
Shall we show the book?
Yes, let's show it. The thing is, unfortunately, the famous radiocarbon dating method, as well as...
Sorry to interrupt. Just for clarity's sake, tell us first about the book. It's 400 pages, and as I understand, it argues that the method is invalid.
Yes. This book was published in Germany in 1997. Its subtitle reads, Unveiling the Illusion that Radiocarbon Dating and Dendrochronology Can Accurately Date Artifacts. Unfortunately, radiocarbon dating has margins of error stretching into thousands of years. And this is proven by a whole series of impeccably conducted experiments by unbiased scientists. So, despite its appeal, the method is unsuitable for dating the material culture of our civilization.
Still, we're living at the end of the 20th century. Are there any current methods that can accurately determine, say, the age of a mummy or everyday objects?
I've come across reports that some new methods are being developed, based, if I'm not mistaken, on strontium isotopes and the like. I could be wrong, but as far as I know, no clear and definitive methods have yet been created or established.
So, what am I really asking? That with current testing methods, it's impossible to either prove or disprove Fomenko's theory.
I believe that the mathematical, statistical, and astronomical evidence is just as weighty as any evidence produced by physical methods.
You're not that easy to shake.
The laws of mathematics, statistics, and astronomy are absolutely objective and independent of human will.
In that case, I think it makes sense to move on to the question that everyone watching from the beginning has likely been waiting for. What exactly happened to the Tatar-Mongol invasion? The one that supposedly never happened, even though we've all been taught that it did, and that we lived under the Tatar-Mongol yoke for 300 years?
Andrei, allow me to draw attention to a number of oddities surrounding this so-called Mongol Tatar invasion. But first, I'd like to focus on the supposed consequences of the invasion. Here, I'll even quote from a textbook that reflects the traditional point of view. In this textbook, the consequences of Tatar rule over our lands are examined. At the same time, it's worth noting that the arrival of the Tatars and the circumstances of the conquest of Russia are not addressed at all. That is, the Tatars are presented as if
not addressed at all in the traditional account?
They are addressed, but textbooks often gloss over them. The Tatars are presented like a kind of atmospheric event. As in, everyone knows the Tatars were there, so that's kind of common knowledge. Let's take a look. Here, they analyze the influence on the governmental and social order. That is, on the political system. I won't go into all of the arguments here. The conclusion, from a traditional historian, is as follows. Tatar authority could not establish or abolish anything here, as it was not guided by any conscious motive. So, it turns out the Tatars conquered Russia more or less unconsciously, so to speak. Here are the supposed results of their economic and administrative activity. But how could the Tatar influence on Russian life have been significant if, after conquering Russia, they didn't stay to live in its rich yet for them inconvenient forested regions, but instead retreated to the southern open steppe? Apparently, not only were the Mongol herds grazing in the steppe, but the Mongols themselves, since they showed no interest in Russian farmland, fields, those very same steppes, rivers, lakes, the wealthiest cities, or foreign trade. All of this meant nothing to them. Now let's look at what was happening with Russian culture. The clearest indicator of cultural development is typically the written literary language. According to the historian Karamzin, from the 13th to the 15th century, right in the middle of the so-called Mongol invasion, the Russian language evolved from coarse, simple vernacular forms to the heights of classical, proper Church Slavonic. That is, precisely during the time of supposed foreign occupation.
Which actually can't be, right?
Let's now sum everything up and see what we get. What's happening with the church? During the Tatar invasion, the church was exempted from all taxes and levies. What's more, even church people weren't counted, not only the clergy, but also peasants and townspeople attached to monasteries. For instance, Karamzin writes that during the Tatar invasion, one could say the majority of old Russian monasteries were built. These monasteries, aside from being centers of culture, literacy, and libraries, were also major economic units. They were essentially powerful fortresses, brilliantly integrated into the landscape from a military standpoint. Moreover, if they were male monasteries, they were full of strong men who, as we know, could easily turn into warriors when necessary. Take Perezvet and Oslabya. Perezvet clearly didn't show up at the Battle of Kulikovo dragging a fence post from some village brawl, you know? These examples show us what was actually happening in Russia. In the end, what do we have? The Mongol Tatar invasion essentially led to two consequences. First, a 10% tax on the population, which remains an unattainable dream for today's progressive Russian society. And second, a 10% conscription rate into the army.
I also wanted to ask you about the Mongol Tatar invasion. As far as I understand, an invasion is, for example, what happened when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, when territories are taken over by the conqueror. That's what I always thought. But did Russian territories actually come under Mongol Tatar control?
I'm not sure what would even count as territory being taken over by the Mongol Tatars in this case, since there was no Tatar administration established in Russia. Russia was never disarmed. There were always standing military forces, including those of the princes, and Russia continued producing weapons.
You explain everything so logically that I'm starting to think maybe there really wasn't an invasion. So, what do traditional historians mean when they talk about the Mongol Tatar yoke? In their view, what was the yoke?
Literally, the invasion refers to a raid by nomadic tribes from Central Asia. But even there, we run into huge questions.
So, they just came and left?
Andrei, pay attention to this astonishing fact. What was the Mongol army? It was a powerful, brilliantly organized, advanced, and completely victorious army for its time. We know that such a strong and victorious army can only exist in a rich, densely populated, and well-organized state. So, how did nomadic tribes manage to unite into a quasi-state? It's completely unclear. A nomadic way of life and a state are, by definition, opposites. Where were the Mongol mines? Where were the craftsmen forging weapons? Where was the talent foundry of Mongol officer and general staff, so to speak in today's terms? How was the Mongol army supplied during its 1,000-kilometer treks across deserts and steppes? When you start thinking about all these things in purely material, physical terms, you realize that none of it adds up. Not from the right, not from the left, not from the sides, not from the back. Nothing fits. It all feels like fantasy, like it's happening on a Hollywood set. Hercules defeats all his enemies, takes off his fake armor, gets in a jeep, and drives home. That's it.
Still, it's hard for me to just cancel the Mongol Tatar invasion in 5 minutes. Let's take a call now, then we'll come back to this. Go ahead, Yevgenia.
You know, Andrei Vladimirovich, I feel very strange during today's broadcast. I can't say I'm a historian, since I only graduated from the history department at Moscow State University and never went into academia. But to me, this all feels at times bizarre, at times nonsense, sometimes funny, and sometimes like a pile of odd arguments. I don't even feel like arguing. What's telling is that not a single historian has called in. It's like they don't even know how to respond to any of this.
Now we'll continue talking about the Tatar-Mongol yoke. We still have time before the end of the broadcast. But at this point, I have the feeling that one episode won't be enough for our conversation. I want to reach out to historians. If you're watching us, and I know some intellectuals are, please feel free to write or call our studio with your arguments. But the argument, this can't be true because it simply can't be true, doesn't count as an argument. Let's agree on that. So, we'll gladly consider any arguments you may have. Maybe next Wednesday we'll meet again with Andrei Podoynitsyn and respond to your feedback. About the Tatar-Mongol yoke, like you, I read Vasily Yan as a child. I know who Genghis Khan is, who Batu Khan is. Are you saying they didn't exist either?
Without a doubt, there were real military leaders who carried out equally real campaigns, conquests, victories, and so on. But the thing is, Genghis Khan is, as we know, a classic example of not a personal name, but a title. It simply means, Great Khan. As for Batu, according to Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovsky, the name is actually a transformation of the common Russian word batya, dad. You can take that however you like.
Wait, are you saying that both Genghis Khan and Batu Khan were not Tatar Mongol conquerors, but Russian princes?
The essence of the historical reconstruction undertaken by the group led by academician Fomenko is that Mongol Tartary and Great Russia are essentially names for the same state.
Why are there two different names?
One of these names, Mongol Tartary, was likely an external designation. It's a somewhat distorted translation of Great Russia.
Since you live and breathe this, it seems self-evident to you. But you're saying that Mongolia is a translation of the phrase Great Russia. Do I understand you correctly?
Not exactly a translation, more like a rendering.
And what does the word Mongolia mean?
Mongolia is most likely a reproduction of the Greek word Megalian, which itself is a translation of the Russian word Veliki, great. The thing is, before the 20th century, the term used was often not Mongols but Moguls or Moguls, which is even closer to the Greek Megalian. So, Mongol Tartary and Great Russia are names for the same state, which once existed over a territory roughly corresponding to that of the Russian Empire in the early 20th century. And it was historically inhabited by the same peoples who still live on those lands today: Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Tatars, Udmur, Chuvash, Mordvins, and so on. These are our many peoples. This state, apparently, was bilingual from the beginning. It spoke both Russian and Turkic. What I read from Afanasy Nikitin is a vivid example of that.
And who did they pray to? That phrase about Christ being the Spirit from Allah really threw me off.
The thing is, the work on reconstructing the history of religion is still ongoing. It hasn't been completed yet. But of course, there is a working theory, and I'll allow myself to present it now. The idea is that originally there was a single religion, which later split into Christianity with its denominations, Islam, Judaism, and so on. And there's plenty of evidence to support that.
So, originally, everyone on earth believed in the same God?
Yes.
Go ahead, Yevgenia.
Andrei, our viewers are very meticulous and attentive. You didn't answer one of the questions from the beginning of the show. A viewer called with a follow-up. Marina, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Andrei Vladimirovich. Just a quick comment first. We've known about Fomenko for a long time. We even saw his exhibitions back in our dorm at the Moscow Power Engineering Institute between 1976 and 1979. It just seems to me that he's a prisoner of his own theory. All the arguments for it fit in perfectly, and all the arguments against get dismissed out of hand. But I'd still like to ask the question you didn't answer. What software and hardware suite, what computers were used to achieve this impressive result? You quoted closely from Fomenko's book where he mentions that this analysis was done. But today, a lot of people have experience with computing, and that kind of answer doesn't satisfy them. For example, tell us how you entered the data into your program.
I had to apologize for not answering the question directly earlier. The truth is, I'm not a specialist in programming or computer technology, nor am I a mathematician. But if we have another broadcast, I'll definitely get the precise details from Anatoly Fomenko, and he'll be happy to provide a full technical list.
I understand what's behind the question.
It's a perfectly natural one for a technical expert.
But if you really dig into it, what does the question imply? Is the person trying to say it's all untrue? That it couldn't have been done? That no such computers exist? What's the point being made?
I think the question reflects a natural desire to check it for themselves, to try reproducing the results. And I think that's more than reasonable. It's actually a very constructive impulse.
I have one last point to make about the Mongol Tatar invasion. I think it's good that we spent so much time on this topic. Because if you think the arguments don't hold up, then counter them. Andrei Vladimirovich explained everything quite clearly. So go ahead, explain what exactly he said that was wrong. I have one final cultural argument from our great Russian poet. Yes, we are Scythians. Yes, we are Asians, with slanted and greedy eyes. According to Bloch, our slanted eyes are a legacy of the Mongol Tatar yoke. So where is he mistaken?
Andrei, let's all of us, the entire studio, everyone involved in this television production, go stand in front of a mirror and look for traces of the Mongol Tatar invasion on our faces. I haven't seen a single person in your studio with slanted eyes. That probably suggests there are no Central Asians, Chinese, Mongols, etc. among us. And if we compare ourselves to Europeans, if you dress and groom us the same way, you wouldn't be able to tell who's who. Moreover, I have many good acquaintances and friends who are Tatars. And frankly, they look far more European than we look Mongolian.
So, we've concluded that there was no Mongol Tatar invasion, but according to Fomenko, what was happening during that time?
According to Fomenko, it was a particular period in the life of the empire when the population was divided into two groups: civilians, governed by princes, and the military, governed by the Horde. The professional Russian army was called the Horde.
The Russian army was called the Horde?
Exactly. The Russo-Turkic army, if you like, was called the Horde. And it was led by the Grand Prince, who was also referred to as the Khan.
Why?
If you closely analyze old chronicles and accounts by various eyewitnesses, including foreign ones, like Sigismund von Herberstein, Plano Carpini, and others, you'll find that titles like Tsar, Grand Prince, Khan, Khagan, and perhaps even Sultan were often used interchangeably. They referred to the same person, just in different languages.
Got it. We've got 4 minutes left. Maybe we can hear some arguments against this theory. Yevgenia?
We have another caller, a businessman. Go ahead, Boris.
Good evening. You've rejected radiocarbon dating. But what about stratigraphy, the analysis of soil accumulation, which gives clear chronological layers and is easy to verify over shorter timespans? Also, in connection with the claim in the book that Novgorod was relocated to Yaroslavl, and the denial that Novgorod existed as a historical city, how do you explain the existence of 11th century Novgorod, which is well preserved?
I'm not a specialist in the method of soil accumulation, but I'll share my view. The issue is that all of these dating methods are initially tied to the traditional chronology. That's the core problem. Besides, based on experience, the rate of soil accumulation is not uniform and depends on many factors, climate, among others. As for the 11th–12th century Novgorod, I repeat, the dating of the findings is anchored to traditional chronology, nothing more.
Let's say they find some weapon or household item. How is its age determined?
As far as I know, most often by analogy. That is, the object is usually compared to a group of similar finds discovered earlier and already dated. So, if they find, say, a nut of a certain shape and they know that a similar one was found at another site, they assume it's from the same period.
What's your overall impression of our conversation? It's coming to an end.
I'm left with a bit of a lingering doubt that what we're discussing still sounds too paradoxical and unbelievable. I'd like to suggest that our genuinely interested viewers go directly to the original sources: Cherkov, Morozov, Gumiliev, and of course, Fomenko and Nosovsky.
Still, I'd like to invite you back next Wednesday. I don't know how long audience interest will hold out, but in any case, we mention, almost in passing, that Christ was born 1,000 years later than traditionally thought. I'd say that's no less of a bombshell than denying the Tatar-Mongol invasion ever happened.
And yet, that's what the Bible analysis seems to suggest.
Hold on, we'll talk about that next Wednesday, and much more. I'm not a historian, and I can't say I've read all of Fomenko's books cover to cover. What strikes me most about this theory is that someone could even come up with all of this, and be able to back it up with evidence. To me, this theory is a stunning example of the power of human thought and its quest for understanding. And any such quest, if it's real, inevitably leads to paradoxes. In any case, as a journalist, I find it fascinating that we've uncovered such a topic, and I wouldn't want to just drop it. So, next Wednesday, I hope to see you again. And to help you remember us, here's our traditional little gift, some notepads with the Vremechko logo. Hopefully, you'll jot down a reminder. Don't forget to come to the live broadcast of Vremechko.
Our time is up. I want to thank everyone who called in tonight. I'm really grateful to you. We had a huge number of calls. I think it's wonderful that so many people care deeply about history and know it well. I think that's truly remarkable, maybe especially today. All the best. Take care.